Robert K. Dornan, Father Larry Cann, and Reverend Jim Lewis. This had planned to be an informal debate by mutual agreement a few minutes ago. Friendly discussion, I would say, instead of a debate, more or less. And Steve?
Okay, thank you, Randy. Of course, I think everyone in our audience knows what we're here to discuss today. We do have a controversial set of English textbooks in the Kanawha County schools. We have members here both for and against keeping those books in our schools. The impact of the textbook controversy, of course, is far and wide. It has effect not only on the students, children of Kanawha County, but the parents as far as labor, commerce, and industry is concerned. And also, we have had violence either directly or indirectly connected with this book protest. So this afternoon, in the interest of an informal discussion, we're going to just sort of let both sides throw the ball back and forth. And we're going to begin. Mrs. Moore won a coin toss, before we went on the air when we thought we were going to do a debate. I'm confused, in case you can't tell. We're not doing a debate, we're doing a discussion. But Mrs. Moore won the coin toss for the debate, so we're going to let her start by telling... No, we're going to let the opposition start by telling why they are in favor of keeping those books in Kanawha County schools.
Kickoff. If you haven't gathered this by now, you will shortly know that there's a lot of confusion at this moment who's the opposition and who are the protagonists. But since Alice, in spite of having won the lot, which is, I thought, the Lord's favor was shown to her by that toss of the coin, having chosen to remain silent at first, I would begin by reaffirming the fact that I am in favor of the textbook series that have been adopted, that I'm sure out of 325 books, even I find some material that I would raise questions about, but the adoption as a whole I find respectful of the students. I find encouraging of their imagination, and all in all, I think the school consultants and the county school board have done a fairly good job in providing materials in English language arts for our youngsters. So we have no rules on how to proceed, and if I can talk for the rest of the day.
Well, that's all right. If you want to stop talking, I'd like to. I heard you say there were some things in the books that you would raise some questions about. What kinds of questions and what things would you raise questions about in the book? I'd be interested to know. Maybe we have some mutual ground here that we don't know about.
That's very true. That's very true. If you know what you say, I wish the whole of Kanawha County would hear very clearly that Alice Moore and I have a mutual ground that we have never heard about.
Right, as long as you have some objections.
Right, and as long as you find favor with some.
Right, okay, now we found the mutual ground.
And I think that's one of the questions that I refer to, Alice, is a question that will always be with us. It's been with us about the arts, about literature, about movie making, and the question about how much plainness, life plainness, do you have to include in a book, in a movie, in a poem, in a piece of art, a painting, to make your point? Now that's a question that people argue about constantly.
Well, I understand that now you are suggesting that possibly there are some things we should remove. For instance, June 27th, the board did remove 8 textbooks, and at that time, many people, the committee who selected the textbooks and some others who supported the textbooks, had already talked about what a beautiful program it was, how fine it was, and they very much opposed the removal of any material. Now, the board did remove 8, and I don't recall anyone screaming editorially or otherwise that Harry Stansbury was a censorer censoring out textbooks, and yet Harry Stansbury, in his judgment, removed the books that he found objectionable at that point. You say you find some more things objectionable.
Now, first of all, that's one advantage of sitting across from each other. I didn't say that. I said that there were materials about which I would have questions, and the question I raised was I've already identified one of my questions. So before I get boxed into into corners, honey, I just want to, we'll continue to clarify what.
Oh, yeah. Now, we may have lost our common ground.
Can I jump in here, because I'd like to for a second, until we do lose our common ground, we can't really talk about common ground, because I think we're going to kid each other if we sit around this table and think we're in total agreement. We want to look for those places where we are in agreement. But I'd like to say at this point that the books are good, and the system by which we got those books is good. And you're a part of that system, Ms. Moore, and I respect the system that gave us those books. That's not to say, by the way, that that system can't be improved. I say that the books are good, and that's not to say that the books are perfect, because that's not possible in a curriculum.
Could the system be wrong,
Let me finish that, Bob. I'd like to say this, that these books present a multicultural, multi-opinioned society, and I think that those words have been bantered around and have been used and frequently used, and I think what that stands for to me is basic in a language arts program. I think these books provide that, multicultural, multi-opinion. I think they provide a setting for real language arts development, and that, when I say that, I mean this, that they don't just teach a child to use words, but they teach a child to live in a world that is larger than the literal, larger than the verbal even, helping children develop their own thought processes and their own decision-making. And that, by the way, is always against the setting of a controversial world, a world in which there is ugliness as well as beauty, a world in which there is, where everything isn't resolved and tied up neatly in a box. And for that reason, I think the books are good. Secondly, I think the books are good. I think the decision to put the books in school was good, because it came to us through a process that, even though maybe in need of being looked at, maybe we can talk about some ground there where we can agree, I think is legal, was legal, and I think, in fact, that the fact that the books are out of the school system right now, to me, was a thwarting of that process, which in this county we have as a legitimate way to get books. It's also a subversion, I think, of the basic professionalism of our teachers and our educators. We've had them bantered about lately, and I've heard many people as I've gone about this county say, "You trust them, I don't." And I think this is a destructive aspect of this whole controversy to me.
What about the professionalism of parents? We're totally disregarding the rights of parents. There seems to be a great deal of concern with the rights of teachers, but I think you are forgetting completely the rights of parents. Now, I think you have some, Mr. Dornan, you had some remarks you want to make to that. I would like to first talk about the method of selection. I don't think the method by which these books were selected was good. I have attempted to make a few minor changes in the method by which we selected books, and the changes are not sufficient. We're going to have to make more. They're going to have to be made through the legislature, I think. For instance, these books from the state level right on down are selected solely and totally by professional educators without any input from the public at all. The governor appoints the Board of Education, the State Board of Education members. They're not elected. The State Board of Education members appoint a superintendent. 12 years ago, I believe it was, something around that time, we elected our State Board of Education superintendent, but we don't any longer. He is appointed. He appoints someone on his staff to select from among those teachers and administrators who volunteer for the job, the people, professional people, to serve on a state committee that reviews all elementary textbooks, elementary only, and decides which books. They censor out all the books that they don't want, and they include those that they like. They censor out the ones that they think are bad. In other words, you understand, they censor them out.
By censor.
I'm making the point that they eliminate them. It's censorship, as well as when I choose to, as a board member, to say that these are good or bad. But still, we're talking about people who are not in any way directly accountable to the public. Now, when it comes to the local level, our books are totally selected by a curriculum committee made up of professionals only. Now, we have had in the past a committee of parents or people from the community who had some, who sat in on the discussions about the textbooks, but they were forbidden to know what books were going to be adopted until after they were adopted. That's so that they couldn't do anything about it. have any effect on the changes or the determination of what was
Who
going to be
forbade them?
adopted.
At this point, I think we...
By the Board of Education. By board
Forbade?
policy, they were not permitted to know what books were going to be adopted until after they were adopted.
It is a very different thing
Well,
to
wait a
say
minute, let me
that-
let me
No, I'm
complete.
sorry.
I'm not through.
Okay.
In fact,
But
the
you're-
Board of Education members, when I went on the board, we were not even permitted to know what books were going to be adopted until we were prepared to adopt them. Now, that's how much choice we had, and yet the legislature puts it into the hands of boards, and parents think they have something to do with their children's education through the election of board members, when, in fact, they had nothing or very little to do with their children's education at all, because our board members totally voluntarily, on their own, had for years permitted textbooks to be selected, kept secret from them, kept secret from the so-called Citizens Committee that sat in on that discussion, and then they adopted the books, no questions asked, that were presented to them. Now, that's why we are having all the controversy now, because for the first time, the last 3 years since I've been on the board, I am sort of calling the hand of the professionals in this case.
Very good. Very good.
Right.
My turn.
Very good.
Since
Not sitting
Reverend
around
Lewis
people.
defended the system, let me point out that in the last decade, this country has seen much conflict and demonstration in the street because the system that put us in Vietnam was determined to be totally erroneous and false by some people who turned out in the streets. There have been highway commissions all across this country that have said, let's put the freeway or the thruway through the redwoods, through the state's only waterfall, or let's put it in this area where the noxious fumes will kill the lovely rosebuds and wildflowers. And citizens have said, from the Sierra Group to Ralph Nader's Consumer Group, wrong. The system has made a mistake. So I think that we should concede right from the outset that although Reverend Lewis thinks the system functioned fine in this case, systems can be wrong.
Now, wait a minute, Bob. At the risk of being taking you at your glib best, because I think you do that frequently. You're very glib. Let me say
Is that a pejorative adjective for articulate?
Oh, I better get my dictionary out here. You're getting heavy on me.
Not that heavy, not... I
saying-
went through the old school system,
Okay,
so
I'm
it
saying
must
that-
have hurt me somehow.
I'm saying this because, and I'm saying this from a perspective of one who stood with civil rights people.
I suspected that you did. I suspect Father did,
You gonna let me
too.
finish?
Why do you
You gonna let me
Oh,
finish?
go ahead. That's why the shoe's on the other foot.
Yeah. Let me finish, and then we'll, we can. Yeah, I'll let you speak. Now you gonna let me speak?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I stood in sympathy with much of the civil rights situation in terms of the Vietnam War, the same way. But I've always approached civil disobedience in this fashion, that for a man to challenge the law, or for a community to challenge the law, they must be ready not only to challenge it, but to do it from within, and to be ready to stand under the law that they challenge. And I think the best civil rights challenge that I knew was not those challenges that were from the outside and were destructive and violent and were breaking law and not being punished. But, by the way, the best civil rights protest was done by people who were willing to stand up, and I'm not against people standing up and being counted. That's what this country's all about. But I am for them, when they stand up, they then must be ready to stand under the law and look for further adjudication. And I'm saying this.
And maybe go to jail like Reverend King did.
That's right. That's right.
Finally.
And I'm saying this, that 30 days ago, or roughly 30 days ago, when the books were taken out of the school, it was done under manipulative pressure, when the law was not being enforced, and tremendous pressure was brought to bear. And I say at that time that that those who were violating the law were not being given the dignity of civil disobedience at its best. And I mean by that, they weren't allowed to carry it to the next process legally in this country, to the next higher court.
Well, that's very fair of you, because I think because if you do look at this editorial that you had in your papers a few weeks ago about the shoe now being on the other foot, let's kind of look at it from the perspective of someone who was morally committed against the war in Vietnam. If all three networks in a given middle community, and West Virginia is a large community in this area, it's called in media the Charleston-Huntington media, and it's the 33rd largest community in America. And there are 20 states smaller than West Virginia. So West Virginia is not what New York looks down its nose at, some small backwater state. All right.
Now, wait, who said it's a small backwater state?
Oh, I've seen those editorials. Undereducated
Come
people,
on.
backwoods creekers,
The bar
fundamentalists.
paper shack
Let me
at
tell you
the
something
end of the
about...
column, friend.
Right, let me tell you something about that word fundamentalist. When I read that word fundamentalist, whether it's in a New York Wall Street Journal editorial or Newsweek magazine or Time, you know how that translates to me in Los Angeles? Christian, period.
Well,
That's all it means. Because, and I wouldn't take that away from you as a priest or you as an Episcopalian minister, and all these little pejorative, snide, little ugly remarks about self-ordained people. I don't know who ordained John the Baptist.
Who around here at this table is
No, you don't know, you guys, but you know this is on the paper. All right, let me come back to the point I'm going to make. Suppose you have someone, and let's face it, the way a Christian is supposed to operate is to give a little empathy for the other side and see what really is bothering them. Suppose you were on the other side and all 3 TV stations editorialized against you and were very selective in their editing when they present the stories, particularly on a Cronkite show last night. Now suppose, which you know is going nationally, and the Creekers know it's going nationally. Now suppose both papers...
The Creekers.
And in this city, you've got the same situation as most American cities, down to just a morning and an afternoon paper, both in the same building, using the same printing presses, and one is supposed to be conservative, but from the editorials I've seen, where they say the books are sound and great, as the paper said yesterday evening, both papers editorializing against your position. You look at most of the radio shows, and they're either like one show I was on this morning where they're totally objective, didn't say anything either way, or they also editorialize against the anti-text.
You were on a totally objective show this morning?
No. One of the stations.
Oh, I thought you said you did. I'm sorry.
The general manager walked out and said, "We have not editorialized," and I took him at his word.
Okay.
So what you have is a total media situation of a viewpoint not really expressed, and the people say, hey, the media is aligned against us. Now that's the way the Vietnam War was in its early days against those protesters. Then comes some civil disobedience with heavy-handed injunctions, which we saw against Dr. Martin Luther King in the South in the early days, and all of a sudden you see a man shooting wildly into a crowd, taken down, arrested, arraigned, and released without spending a night in jail, and a minister who is protesting in front of a bus stand, he's suddenly thrown in jail for 90 days under contempt of court by an injunction and no bail. Now that legal process, although we may understand the legal ramifications, looks very rough and heavy-handed to these people. So the frustration factor that brought me here, and I have found it wonderful that I was not called an outsider and was accepted. And by both sides, I might add, because I think your side is desperate to have the kind of discussion we're having now, to really look at the objections and to try to talk this thing so there is no more gelignite or dynamite or bombings or so forth. But I think that you've got to understand with some empathy, deeper than sympathy, the frustration of this other side now. A person calls the house this morning, and I'll finish on this, and she says with her bad grammar, the reason that schoolhouses are being blown apart, which we all hate, is because I can't go on television because I know my grammar are bad. And she said, I'm not going to go up there and be humiliated, but I want my children to speak proper grammar. And I don't want textbooks saying that there's nothing wrong with bad grammar. And now that's just a fascinating point on the grammar alone. So you have people that feel self-conscious about being on the tube, and you have an education that gives you no accent, Reverend Lewis, and yet you admitted you were nervous here yesterday, getting used to the media. So these people are very uptight about expressing their viewpoint. It's unfair.
Well, you know, I was with you pretty much till the end. We've had, I think that we have people in this community on both sides of this particular discussion who have been able to articulate, and I'm not saying you're not welcome. Forgot, you know, I said this very clearly the other day on the same station, that I even, I even took issue with a friend. I welcome you. I've gone to other communities myself when I felt that my convictions took me to that. But I welcome you as an interested person. I really, 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 for your sake and for Alice's and for mine, wish that you would not come on the basis that the people here have no power of articulation, especially in public. I really find that
Both
bothersome.
of your newspapers have told me that.
Well, you've already... I'm not talking about both the newspapers. I'm talking about people who object to the test books, who have been leaders of this objection in public, who are perfectly articulate, who I have never had any trouble understanding, and I'm sure this community has had no trouble understanding.
Oh, I would disagree with you.
So I welcome you. I welcome you. You know, you can come stay in my rectory if you want to while you're here. But
I plan on doing that.
I really don't. Hey, no. I've been on the phone with Twin Circles all day, you wouldn't believe. But I really think that we do a disservice to our people and I hate to sound like I'm chastising, but I'm proud of my state, and I'm proud of my fellow West Virginians.
Well, the general
And I think
manager of
that-
one of your radio stations said to me this morning that we're losing industry in here. We're being pictured on New York television through the 3 networks as a bunch of stupid hillbillies. He said, I'm ashamed of my state and city.
Did you ever
and he said, can't we raise the level of the debate here? And I said, well, first of all, the media is to blame for that, because I don't find anything wrong with, as far as I'm concerned. I'm trying to get Alice on the Today Show and on the Mike Douglas Show.
No.
And I think when she does, you're going to see a national explosion, because this is a national issue. You do have the people that can articulate it. I'm staying with a surgeon and his wife now. When she spoke at the textbook hearing the other night, I noticed she didn't turn up on the network news. No, they deliberately filmed the stories in such a way as to incite.
Now, wait a minute.
What are we doing
Wait a
here? What are we
minute,
doing
yeah.
here, Larry? We're talking about the media now?
Yeah,
Is that
and
what
this is
we're
an
talking about?
important,
Media is
this is
the
an
problem
important
here.
point. This is an important point.
This is a
You
major
sound-
aspect of the
all right,
problem here, is the
let's just-
media coverage.
Why don't you
Let's
look
cool
at
it just a
Larry,
minute.
yeah.
Let's cool it just a minute. Because now, Bob, you said the shoe is on the other foot. I know exactly what you mean, because I have been a protester my whole adult life. And it is intrinsic to any protest that you feel exactly the way you feel about your position. I have never known a protester who was treated fairly by the newspapers, by television, by the federal government, by the state government, or anything else. I have never known a protest. It's the nature of the beast.
Or by
That once you,
politicians.
well, nobody's treated
And many
fairly by
times
politicians.
judges.
All right. But yeah, okay. You know, ad valorem. But my point is that there is an awful lot of this in everybody's feelings in a protest movement, you know. And you mentioned yourself some of the, especially the early days of the anti-war movement, you know. We can document unfairness, insensitivity. I had people tell me that they could not understand why the Board of Education did not do everything they said, because so many of them went and complained. The idea being that because there were a number of people complaining, the system would automatically respond exactly the way those people wanted. 500,000 people went to Washington and complained about the war. And the one man who could do anything about it at the time watched a football game, you know?
There's one thing for certain. The national news media came around to seeing things their way. And let's take the Charleston Gazette specifically, if I may, and I already have. Okay. I can recall an editorial in the Charleston Gazette defending the violence in Washington, D.C. when rioters were breaking into stores, stealing televisions and couches, and the National Guard stood there with unloaded guns, and these people walked out with everything they could pick up and carry with them, and the Charleston Gazette defended them. Now, here locally, in our situation, we have the papers all across the country are still attributing to the protesters 2 shootings. To my knowledge, no protester has yet had a gun in his hand. No protester has been arrested with a gun or for shooting anyone.
Alice, let me put a footnote there. In
Okay.
California, the impression was either deliberately or sloppily given that the violence and the gun shooting was from book protesters toward innocent crowd members. That was the first vicious error that I learned when I hit this city.
Right, and I can think of one story that I saw in a friendly paper from California that still attributed to the protesters the violence. Why? Because this is what they picked up on the wire service, and yet it is not true. There has been violence against those people who are opposed to these books, as well as violence on the other side. And we don't know right now who's bombing the schools, for instance. But who's getting credit for it? Who gets hurt when a school is bombed? I suggest that the protesters' side is the one who gets hurt, because the national news media
is running
immediately...
as a law and order candidate, and the
Right.
very spot where the bomb went off Monday night, the exact physical spot is where I stood that morning with national CBS and maybe presumptuously promised that there would be no more violence because we were getting this all together. And on the very spot in front of the Midway School, a bomb goes off, and the only bomb all week. That's very suspicious. Now, I'm not into the Jane Fonda thing about agents provocateur. I usually reject that. But this was weird.
Hey, time out a second. I got to get a word, because we're skirt all around, and we're not focusing in. And it seems strange that all of a sudden we began talking about books in Kanawha County, and now we're talking about Vietnam, and we're talking about media particularly, and that's a legitimate subject.
Before you get away from that, I want to say one more thing that I started to say. Just a few days ago, a week or a little more than a week ago possibly, the Daily Mail ran another editorial attributing to the protesters the near killing of the gentleman who was shot in front of Smith's transfer. The protesters were not responsible. The man who was responsible had just completed placing an ad in the paper in support of the textbooks, signed by his name. The ad had to be canceled. The organization which he helped to form, the organization defending the books and promoting the books, then immediately changed their name to disassociate themselves with him. And the news media...
Wait a minute.
Of course it's
You don't know.
But the news media has deliberately...
You are
I'm
wrong.
not through. The news media has
may not be through, but you're wrong.
deliberately left the impression that the protesters were responsible for that, and the Daily Mail ran an editorial a little over a week ago saying just that.
Okay, the debate has now changed. We're not discussing textbooks any longer. We're discussing the media, and we're talking about
Right.
national
And
conspiracies,
violence,
and we're
and-
talking about all kinds of things.
We're also talking
We're
talking about a very
what's going on in
inaccurate...
California being illustrative of what's going on in West
No, I
Virginia.
didn't mention anything in California. I
You
mentioned
didn't.
national news coverage and what happens by the time it gets out to the coast in California.
Wire service.
Mr. Dornan, you didn't mention just a second ago that in California this very same thing was going on?
No, I didn't. No, I said that the
said
national
reports about what was
coverage,
going
when
on
it, by the time it gets to California, is biased to the
You
extreme.
didn't say just a second ago, because I want to get this clear. I want to understand what you're saying.
I said
that,
in
that people in
California.
California were saying, attributing to those who were anti-protest.
No. We learned from the national media by either deliberate twisting or inference that the violence was only, the gunshots were from book protesters against innocent bystanders in the crowd. And that happens to be exactly 180 degrees out of phase with the truth.
Oops. Now, wait a minute. I'll tell you, I've heard so
Just a
doggone
moment.
much... Oh, wait
Let's
a
all
minute.
wait a minute. We have to take a break.
Oh, pot you
Let's
and your
break for commercial message. We'll Randy Patrick along with Steve Smith and our guest. They'll quit arguing for a few minutes. Our Mrs. Alice
Randy,
Moore, Robert K.
discussing.
Robert K. Dornan, Father Larry Cann, and Reverend Jim Lewis. And we will take some phone calls, not on there. You can call in. People will answer the phone and write your question down. The phone number is 744-5388. And who wants to pick up from where
Randy,
we
can
left
I make
off?
a suggestion
Yes.
that might add some structure? I hope we don't get into an argument about how to structure the discussion. But there are several issues. A question here. Now, Father just said to Alice, did you ever think that all the editorials went against you because you don't have that much of a point? I can assure you from talking to people in the state capitol today, from the museum up to the governor's office, secretaries who are ashamed of all the violence, but they want to hear this discussed deeply, and people in New York and in California and all over this country are interested. No,
Yeah, you
okay,
make
here's
the
what I'd like to
speech.
do.
Let's have the
Number one, you cannot, I don't think, discuss college books or high school books or primary grade school books all in the same sentences. Because just as we don't give a kid in the first grade Hamlet to read...
All right. I'll promise, this is Jim Lewis. I think we're supposed to identify ourselves. And
Yeah.
Maybe only you and I
I'm
should
Jim
do
Lewis,
that.
and I'm going to say this to you. If you want to adopt that rule, then let's have you adopt the rule that says that stays away from statements like you've made in this community that all the books stink.
Yeah, well, I do
That's
think... not very...
Bob, if we're going to make a distinction between elementary books and supplementary, which I'm willing to do, let's you make a distinction, and that is you stay away from trigger words, and you don't like trigger words, that the books stink.
Okay.
That's a trigger word.
Yeah, it also... Let's talk about...
If that is what the stories would refer to as realistic language or street language, although I recall using that probably before I was even in the first grade, you stinking guy or something, that I'll use a different word. At the grade school level, the Heath series is putrid. At the high school level, the supplementary books are putrid. As far as grammar and teaching basics, which is an American nationwide issue now, of why at Cal Berkeley, 90% of the incoming English class, it was just announced nationally over network radio and TV, bonehead English. So the school system's failing in reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Would you do me
That's
one
an issue
favor?
here. Now, there's three issues.
Okay, well, let's
Primary
do-
books, high school books, and the fact that our school system is failing.
I got to ask one favor.
Father Cann.
May I ask one favor? I think we're all adults, and we all read, and we all watch television. I don't think that we have to be reminded that every one of these issues is brought to us by national television, by national magazines, and everything else. We can probably short-circuit some of our confusion.
Father, you just said there's no other side.
No, wait a
The
minute.
points aren't valid. They are valid. There are two sides to this story. That's a very prideful statement to make. Alice, have you ever thought that you don't have a position? That there isn't any validity
make my
to
own
your
statements.
stand?
If you would mind your own business, I'll make my own statements to Alice.
I just heard what you said.
That's right, and I will
In
say
English.
that's right, and that was said during the break to Alice in a private discussion, and I think it's grossly improper for you to quote that.
No,
I didn't say anything at the time. Now, hush up.
No, Father.
Hush
Well,
up.
let me warn you something then for all the future breaks. After 8 years of hosting radio and TV shows, I made it
man,
clear to
don't
my
throw
guests
that.
that there's nothing discussed in the breaks that's sacrosanct.
Okay.
Well, now,
Okay,
so
an
let's go
expert-
by those
You're
grounds.
an expert on national TV and debate, okay.
Will you stop the ad hominem attack?
Yeah.
Do you understand that Latin expression, Jim?
Yeah.
Really, stop it,
Don't
Jim.
talk down to me, Bob.
Jim, I'm not talking down to you. I expect you to know what ad hominem means. Stop the personal attack.
You are concerned.
It's ugly and it's divisive. I'm not going to do it to you.
Alice, I
I'm
think
not
you
going
and
to
I
say you
should
sit
leave.
here in your turtleneck sweater and your wonderful leather-thonged cross and all that. Knock off the ad hominem crap. Come on.
You realize-
Let's talk intelligent issues here.
Can I address myself that?
Sure.
Let's just take a good look at what you just did
What?
with the turtleneck sweater. And,
Did you just say get on a soapbox to me?
No, I'm saying to you.
You can't take
what
some
is
of
it-
your own
what
ad
is it-
hominem
What is it you're doing
medicine,
to me? around
meaning
it?
to the man in Latin personal attacks? Knock it off.
You're
Father hasn't done it yet.
overwhelming me with all your...
I won't, hopefully. I don't think... Now, wait a minute. I have written... You know the first words I wrote down here on my paper, my little notes, I have Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Zaire. Now, the reason I wrote that down was because I have been challenged to a debate. A guy named Bob Dornan on the radio, you know him? Challenged me to a debate. I have the feeling that somehow this whole get-together this afternoon has somewhere in somebody's mind gotten to be the mastodon and the dinosaur will now fight, you know. Oh, I think that's kind of screwing us up. You know, I think we're not paying, at this point, too much attention to what we're supposed to be talking about. I think that we're all a little hot. I am. I did kind of resent you saying that, although it was no big deal.
Saying what, Father?
You know, quoting me what I had said to Alice, because I was going to say it my own way later on. But like I said, it was no big deal. I think...
Well, I think you really feel that way.
Okay.
There is no other position.
Okay.
And that is germane.
Man,
Let's talk
will you
books
just,
and,
will you
the
just,
situation.
wait a minute now. Let me finish pouring cold water on this thing. Because I think you guys, everybody's getting a little hot. And I don't think that's helping anything. I'm going to take Alice out of here if you keep this up. You know? We'll go talk on another stage. I'm trying to save you. Anyhow, let's get back to, let's let things go for a second. I would like to get back to something that Alice said in the beginning, because I think it's a part of what causes problems, at least to me, in understanding what we're talking about, you know? Two things. First of all, you said that after that fellow got in trouble for shooting at the Smith transfer, the UPS actually, was where the Knoll was involved. It wasn't the Smith transfer, it was UPS. And you said that the organization that he was going to establish had to changed its name to avoid the association with him.
With which he was affiliated.
That's right. Now, Alice, I was at the initial meeting of the steering committee of that organization, and the name was adopted for totally other reasons than the one you state. Now, I think it's important. It's a small matter, but to me, it has to do with how accurate are we going to be. You know, it sounds kind of...
That's extremely accurate in
All
this
right.
case. I'll quote my sources and you quote yours. Mr.
Well, how was
Elmer
it that
Fike,
meeting?
at my suggestion, called Mrs. Lee Platt
Mhm.
and asked her if it were not true that this man had been associated with them. She agreed
that's
that he
true.
had been, and then she did agree that they changed the name because they didn't particularly like this association. This came to me from Mr. Fike, who had called Mrs. Platt.
All right, first of all...
And Mr. Platt, of course,
That's
heads up the
understandable.
organization. Of course
Okay,
it is.
now I
I'm
appreciate-
not criticizing the action. I am simply pointing out that we're getting blamed for something for
Okay.
which we were not responsible.
Okay, now that's
wait, let me
perfect.
finish this point.
All right.
I do not, because of the man who did the shooting, I don't say, oh, you're for the books, then you're automatically for shooting protesters. On the other hand, I resent the implication that, oh, you are against the books, then you're out blowing up schools.
Okay, now let me... All right, we'll consider that moot then at this point. You said, and I really want clarifications here, because let's go back to our talk about the system and the process whereby decisions are made. I think this is the greatest facet of our society that's endangered right now.
And this is sure not off the subject, by the way.
Oh, no, I'm just trying to get back on the subject.
Right.
Alice said in the beginning that the board was not permitted to know what books were being considered until the selection had been made. Now,
Now, wait a
at
minute,
this-
would you repeat that?
you said that the Board of Education was not permitted to know what books were being considered before a selection was made.
I said when I went on the board and I insisted on a change, and I had the help of Russell Whirley, who was on the board at that time, and he had a friend who served on the textbook committee who brought it to the attention of the public that the textbook committee was nothing but a showcase committee, forbidden to even know what books were going to be adopted until after it was adopted. I didn't say that's the way it is done now. I said this is the old practice. It's hard to change old practices.
Then the practices have been changed, and then these
Due
things...
to the action of certain board members, Mr. Whirley and myself, over the shocked hesitancy of the members of the administration, who just couldn't believe that board members would actually insist upon knowing what books were to be adopted before they adopted them.
Okay. When you said that the board was not permitted, I want to get back to this. There's another thing that has to do with, clarity of communication. Your clear implication was that these things were all kept secret. You even used the word secret.
They were.
Now,
They were kept
all right, now, if you have helped to open this system...
But not
as
at this point.
Okay, but I want to congratulate you for that, and I hear a lot of good things about you for that reason. For other reasons,
She's made
too.
it a national issue.
Well, okay. Here again, I would like to... At this point, I would like to see a decent resolution to the problem in Kanawha County. I have, for 22 years, been involved in a variety of areas of public interest on a national level. I don't feel at this time that we have to save the nation. I think we have, first of all, to come to some reasonable solution to our problem in Kanawha County. National issues along these lines existed before and will exist after our thing here. And I really feel that we only obfuscate matters by, by trying to deal with this or refer to it in its national or cosmic dimensions. School board laws, for instance, vary.
Father, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Sure.
Isn't this a really deep battle over value systems? Over whether or not we are living in a God-centered society and nation or a man-centered, secular humanist concept?
No, sir, Robert,
Aren't
it
these
is
textbooks
not.
written by secular humanists?
Robert, you have just perhaps flushed yourself because you put yourself on the
I hope
side
not
of
all
God.
the way.
Well, maybe so.
Down the
because-
drain.
Maybe so, I don't know. It depends on how deep the drain is. But you put yourself then on the side of God,
No.
and me and Jim
No.
on the side of the secular humanists.
No.
Because, wait a minute, you have to face the implications of what you say. You can't make a statement and then hide behind a no. You said, is this not a battle, this textbook controversy, is it not a battle between God-fearing people and secular humanists? Evidently, now, I am a
No, I
perfectly...
said, doesn't it touch on deeper
No, you
issues
didn't.
like that? The Wall Street Journal thinks it does.
Is it not? All right, take it.
I am willing to concede, I'm willing to concede and give you and Jim the benefit of the doubt that what you see in these books is an attempt to develop inter-ethnic sensitivity and growth in the students, a hardening of them in a positive way so that they can deal with the rugged realities of life and so forth. I'll concede that, but what I'm telling you is this experiment has been used in other places and it's failed drastically. And that's why I said if we could, for example, set the thing down to discuss
Well,
the textbooks in grade school.
Yeah,
They're failing in the area of grammar. Then go to the supplemental books, and then discuss the whole tragedy of American education at this point.
We are going to finish my original point before we get diverted.
Which is about the system.
No.
Oh, I don't mind discussing the system.
My original point in this particular segment was the fact that you said this is at least partially, to give you that,
Okay.
an issue between God-fearing people and secular humanists. You finished that statement by saying...
God-fearing's a little loaded, Father. Let me just change it
Oh,
to
let's
a
change it.
God-centered Judeo-Christian culture.
All right, beautiful. That brings tears to my eyes. Okay, now, you closed that segment by saying that were not these textbooks written by secular humanists. Now, I'm sure anybody listening to that statement automatically sees that, at least in your mind, people lined up on the side of the textbooks are lined up willy-nilly with a bunch of not God-fearing secular humanists.
Yeah,
And that's where I think you're in trouble, because I have been I have been
Not all.
a committed Christian minister for 22 years. I've been a Roman Catholic my entire life. I would like to think
And there
that
is a
my
humanist
concerns-
movement within the church, Father.
I was
We've had
director
a lot of
ecumen-
guys go over the wall to become humanists and dump their Catholic
I was
faith. A lot of
director of
priests and
ecumenical
nuns.
affairs for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Wheeling for 4 years, and I helped establish the current National Ecumenical Workshops. You know, I'm perfectly aware of the ecumenical dimensions of
And there's a
our
lot of ecumenism going on up there in the hollers with
Now,
this Catholic and a lot of
this
self-ordained
is-
ministers, I can assure you
Well, I
that.
can assure you that I've been doing some of that for,
I bet
again,
you have.
22
I bet
years.
you have.
Beautiful. So
But-
we're sorry. But now we're getting distracted again.
May I make a point? We've been on the radio for, what, 45 minutes?
How much time do we have?
Closer to 50. I know what I'm interested in. When I'm not attending radio debates, I live in the valley.
Okay.
I must admit, I do not have any children in school. I have some of my family in school. As I understand this, because I do read, as both your sides here pointed out, are warped and biased newspapers and other media. And I do read that we have two sides to this question. One side favoring leaving these books in the Kanawha County schools, another side favoring the removal of those books. Now, please, let us discuss the removal or the leaving of those books in on their merits, please.
Steve, and let's start on this point. How is it that your papers, which must go into homes, and thereby, by only their own good taste, print papers that respect certain family values, how is it that they reject printing some of the material in the textbooks, that there are certain passages we cannot read on this radio station controlled by the FCC and that we couldn't mention on the Mike Douglas show? How is it that those rules do not apply to textbooks in grade school?
Taking it over into another ballpark. Here you
It
go.
isn't another ballpark. That's, you don't want to know something?
Ladies and gentlemen, should I say ladies and gentlemen, we must do this. This is the only answer. We must discuss these books on their merits.
All
All
right.
right, can I begin with something really obnoxious that I've heard no one else mention in this valley and that I came across looking at one of the textbooks?
Now, as far as saying things on a radio station, please feel free to say whatever you want to say. Anybody.
Okay, now, I'm anxious to hear Father and Reverend Lewis respond to this. Here's a book. Alice, is this one of the 8 thrown out?
This is one of the 8 books.
All right, one of the bones. I will guess that it was probably...
Can I ask Alice
Sure.
to amplify, because we're on radio, and we need to know what we mean when we say those books are thrown out. Could you...
This is one of the 8 books that was taken out on June 27th at the board meeting where it was decided to purchase the remainder of the books.
So when we talk about whatever's in this book, we're referring to books that are not in the system
Wait a
and
minute.
worth throwing
Right,
out.
but let's make
Okay?
it clear that this book was in the adoption. This was selected by the same people. It was praised just as highly
The
as
system
being
failed with
beautiful
this book.
and being beautiful and desirable and the type of book that we would want our children to read. And I have no hesitancy at all in taking these books around and showing them to people because this is part of the interaction series, and we adopted the interaction series totally.
Can I ask you the question, just
Right.
for clarification? These books were adopted by the board and by the selection committee, who ultimately threw them out.
Right, let me point out something
we-
here. Yes. No, the selection committee did not take them out. The board took them out on the night that we took the final action.
Okay.
And the reason being the protest to that point. Now, I raised the objection about textbooks. I am the only board member that for quite some time read any textbooks at all. I discussed these with the other board members. It was, a couple of weeks, I guess, before that final decision was made when we finally decided to get the books into their homes. But this book, while this book was taken out, others were left in. In many cases, books were taken out that were not as offensive as those books we left in. The reason being that I had raised objections to these books. I had read them to this point. They had the publicity, the excerpts had been quoted widely, had been printed on handbills and so forth. So these were removed. And at the same time, others that were as bad, or worse in some cases, were left in. Why? Because I hadn't read them.
My point will be this, at this point, that reading selections from books that have been thrown out and are not being considered as a part of material is really kind of academic and isn't going to be too helpful for us. I would be much happier if we would deal with particularly the basic series which the committee is dealing with right now, the review committee, and which will be a recommendation will be forthcoming to the board. I think if we could deal with the basic text and the supplementary books that are being examined, and spend less time. I'm willing to talk about what's in these other books, but spend less time talking about books that have already been
Jim, it makes a point so strongly.
If you want to know what the controversy is and what's caused the controversy, these handbills printing excerpts from these books caused the controversy. Now, as a result of the handbills, as a result of the controversy, 8 books were taken out. The controversy hasn't ended. And so we have accomplished this much. We need to accomplish more. And the same people who are saying these are so beautiful and so good said this book that we have taken out was beautiful and good. I think it adds quite a bit to the discussion.
I think I need to be challenged on a debate point now about being beautiful, because the textbook selection, Language Arts Selection Committee, did not pick these books on the basis that they were beautiful. In fact, part of their statement of philosophy about the books is that education, and I have to believe
correction, Mrs. Nellie Wood of the textbook committee said this is called these beautiful books,
well,
and most beautiful program. I've heard it
May I
again and
explain
again
for just a moment,
Let me answer.
why I feel it's important to read this, because I think it backs up my statement about humanists
Let me follow this.
and the authors of these books.
Just a moment. We've got a point going here, and I'd like to follow up about the beauty of the books. And I'd like
Okay, but just a moment, one word of explanation before, after you're finished with this, to make this as simple as possible, I have a piece of paper here. If I passed it around, Mrs. Moore would find something objectionable to it, probably that she could not read my writing. I would say that I can read my writing, so we would be on opposing sides. The debate would be whether or not I could read, or my writing was legible. Now, please, let us, after you're finished with that, let us discuss these books on that basis.
Okay, I think
Steve,
the question
would you then, will the chairman make a point then? May I discuss one of the 8 books that has been removed, because I believe it shows the system erred with these 8, and that's an important point. And without putting Mrs. Moore on the spot of being humble or falsely humble, I'll bet if Mrs. Moore wasn't on the school board, this book would be in the system.
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to push you.
Well, look, let me withdraw. All right, so that you won't have to answer that question, let me withdraw the remark.
No.
I realize when someone says we have a beautiful program, they don't mean that everything in it is necessarily beautiful. And it was made clear by many people that we're representing all walks of life and so forth. It's not necessarily something that I would agree with in all cases, but I do agree that it should be in our schools. The only point I will make is that it was agreed that this should be in our schools, and the only reason it is out is because I raised the objection and took it to the parents, and the parents looked at it and were horrified and absolutely said, no, it will not be done. So that's
Here's
the
what
only
I
point will
believe
make.
is a fascinating point. Do you know who that man is, Alice Moore, named Wilhelm Reich, one of the authors in this book?
I'm not familiar.
Have you ever seen that man's name before? All right, Father, this man's name and his particular little article in this book, Essays in Theory, was never brought up, I'm sure. And if it wasn't for one peculiar week in my life 15 years ago, I wouldn't know who this man was, and I wouldn't have researched him and written an article on it. This sex freak, which is the only way I can describe him, an aberrant student of Sigmund Freud's that Freud denied, died in Leavenworth prison for falsely selling orgone accumulators, boxes that cost $10 to make. He sold them for $200 and instructed people to sit in them and masturbate, and they would release orgone energy that comes from orgasm. And he writes for your high school students, and it'll be this book will be pandered in California. So he writes that the entire cultural production, as expressed in literature, this Mr. Reich now for our high school kids, beauty it was described, in poetry, art, dance, movies, folklore, is characterized by its interest in sex. There is no stronger interest with a stronger influence on man than sexual interest. Patriarchal laws pertaining to culture, religion, and marriage are essentially laws against sex. Now, that this nut who died in Leavenworth would appear in a high school book totally unidentified, I think, is one piece of evidence that people who are not God-centered, that do not accept Judeo-Christian ethics as the foundation of our civilization, that they wrote or edited this textbook together.
Can I make a piece of procedure here, because I want to keep this debate on the highest level?
Now, just a moment.
I know you do,
From
Jim.
here on out, or don't ever again use the word debate. We agreed before this. This is not a debate. This is a discussion at the
I want to
agreement
keep
of
the
everyone.
discussion on the highest level. And I think Bob, maybe rightly so, about a half hour ago, said let's stop throwing trigger words around and be careful how we talk about things. And I think what you've referred to, this author, by calling a sex freak, and these kinds of
Is that
words.
street language that we find in these texts?
No, I think that for
All
some...
I'm saying is that's a value judgment that you have about him.
And so did the federal government when they threw him in Leavenworth.
Well, are we you going to say that everyone in prison is sex-free?
No way,
That
because
kind of,
we may both be in
radical-
there for demonstrating this week.
I just want to...
You on Saturday and me on Monday, so
All
we're
right,
going to be
now, in
very
order to
careful.
get this thing back to where it has got to go, and I must emphasize, it has got to go.
Well,
It's
You're
got to
good,
go
Steve,
in
you're
this
good.
direction.
Stay tough.
He pointed out with the book something he found objectionable. Now, with the same book, can you pick out something that you think is right with it?
well,
Sure, probably John Kennedy's in here, Charles Darwin or something.
yeah, look at the index. This man has picked out one...
Leonardo da Vinci's in that book. Sure,
for that, though, you never trust those
Or
towers.
Alan Toffler, Future Shock.
All four of my grandparents came from Italy, for God's sake. I'm just being friendly. Okay.
Except no...
This is one chapter in one book, a book, by the way, that's not even purchasable for us due to Alice's assiduity.
Uh-huh.
And she...
Sure, that's
she
an
was.
important
Okay.
point.
I made sure I made it before you did. I will say this. I would like to ask who put it in there, why they put it in there. You see,
That's what I'm...
whether Mr. Reich was a secular humanist or not, about who wrote this, I don't know. Whether he was a sex freak, I don't know. I do know this, though, Bob, I have to say, in all fairness, that for a man who deplores the use of trigger words and inflammatory talk, you have the most fiery, unfair way of speaking that I've heard.
Father, if you're Italian
Really?
on both sides, you can understand that.
I can understand it, but
I'm
then...
Irish on both sides, and you see, I don't think
But
sex
I would-
freak, I don't think those are trigger words. Sex is not a trigger word, is it?
Just a moment.
We go back to the book.
So it must be the word freak.
Back
If
to
we
the book.
can't, I have a solution to this problem.
We can all go home.
Well, no, our
He's not going to
audience,
throw us out
our
yet.
audience wants you here, and we have some questions from our audience.
Well, that's...
Now, can we agree that we will pick up these cards, which are laying on this table?
Steve, before you do that, the WRDS 1410 South Charleston, West Virginia, continue.
Okay.
Oh, I'm
Almost
sorry, I
heaven.
lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
Not
Okay.
you, too. If you go, we're dead.
Let the person to whom these are addressed answer the question. Now, in whatever way he chooses. Let's make it that, and let's not attack, I have a habit of saying ain't. But if anybody attacks me for that, I'm not going to take it kindly.
Steve, the government spent $121,000 last year out of congressional money to find out why people say that. We have one answer in these textbooks, because the textbooks say it's okay.
So does Webster's Dictionary, by the way.
Right. But will we agree that, with that we can take these cards to the people, and they can answer these questions in whatever form that they choose?
Right.
All right, Randy, if you'll read the questions, please.
All right, I have one. To Mrs. Moore, a woman in Charleston. Have you ever been connected with the John Birch Society?
Absolutely not.
Very good. Next question.
All right.
And neither have I. As a matter of fact, I get a lot of...
Hey,
More,
wait a
I think.
minute.
We're gonna...
Let's just say
Nobody
someone...
asked
Okay,
you.
okay, okay.
All right. Father Cann, would these books be honored in Catholic schools?
I would be happy to have these books in the Catholic schools, and if we had them in the Catholic schools, we would probably have the same kind of difference opinion as we have in the public schools.
Point of order. I think it's going to cripple the discussion somewhat if we don't each get a chance to take a shot at one another's question
I
and
would
answer.
agree with that. I think we have to be able to respond to the answers.
Believe me, there's going to come a question up, Father, that you and Jim are going to want to respond to, so you better throw in with Alice.
I will play by whatever
I will
rules
go
are
along with
established.
that, as long as there are no personal attacks on what somebody's wearing, or the manner that they speak, or what they're speaking.
Or
for
challenges
or
about
against.
being on soapbox.
Wait a minute.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was yours was for
I must
free.
speak. I must speak. Since I spoke about Bob's language, I must make this point. I called him to task for inflammatory language only because he had deplored the use of inflammatory trigger words by the newspaper.
Except,
That's the only reason.
except,
That's the
and
only
I
reason.
question whether my language was inflammatory, but I don't consider that a personal...
That's for Steve. That's talking to
Call me
Steve.
so-
All right, now, we've clarified that point.
That's right. That's all. That's for you.
We have to, I can't be held responsible for what the newspapers do.
Had a question, Randy?
No, wait, may we back up on that point?
Yes.
I spoke, for the first time I became aware of Father Cann, not by name, I sat next to an elderly Catholic couple who were raised in Charleston, going home from here the first time. Their two sons were a lawyer and an engineer, and their daughter was a lawyer. So obviously that's a well-educated West Virginia family. when they asked me what I did, and I told them something about CDL, my group, and so forth, and somehow their religion came up, and they identified themselves as Catholics, and I said I was also, they said they were ashamed of some of the anti-Catholic sentiment in West Virginia because one priest, it appeared, was speaking for the Catholic community about textbooks that never would be allowed into the Catholic school system. So in talking to a couple of priests down here at the cathedral, they said, Father Cann speaks for himself only, and one of them said, go get him, Bob. And they said these books would never be tolerated in the Catholic school system, and I don't think they would.
In all fairness, I feel Father Cann.
Yeah, okay, let me...
We're dealing with what...
Yeah, I think that,
He says you speak for nobody but yourself.
I cannot, I have made that point perfectly clear, and if the well-educated West Virginians that you spoke with on the plane didn't understand that, it's their fault, not my lack of clarity.
Well, I know,
There
it's not
are-
your fault that a lot of other priests
But you
may
make
be
the
gutless.
but don't you,
They
don't...
don't know the
wait,
books,
just
who
a
are
moment.
against the books.
Now, we're going to have to establish some kind of order.
Let's answer questions.
That's right, let's answer questions. And let's stop referring to people as either well-educated, poorly educated. Everyone has an opinion. Now, I have a listener here. I don't know who he or she is. But it's the first intelligent question that we have had today.
Well, that last one was an intelligent question. Would these books be allowed in the Catholic system? The answer is no.
From your point of view.
No, from the church's point of view. Try and put them in its Catholic school system anywhere and watch what happens.
Mr.
Priest told me you closed down your own school at your parish church, that you're against Catholic education.
But those priests that
Wait a
told you that, are
minute,
they
wait.
speaking for
I
themselves?
will not tolerate this kind of personal attack without the privilege of
It's not a
speaking.
personal attack, any
Now,
more than
I
you're
will-
challenging my inflammatory language. I don't think you
Now, if you
challenge
will
me
shut up,
personally.
if you will shut up for 1 minute, I will take 60 seconds. You know? you can keep your-
Is that street dialogue telling you to shut up?
No.
I don't
it's
mind
just
it.
a
I like
request.
it myself because I think it's good, hot discussion. But I
Sir,
just want to get it clear.
gentlemen, please.
Because I think it offended Jim. He fell back and slumped in his chair.
You have not paid attention to one thing that's been said, Bob.
Me what?
You've not paid attention to one thing that's been said.
I have heard everything you've
I'm
said,
not
Bob,
saying
and that
here-
is a personal attack.
not
Don't tell
saying
me I
that.
haven't paid attention to this discussion. Now you have finally faulted yourself with an odd hominem attack.
Get back
Knock it off. This is
Gentlemen,
weird
please.
discussion.
This is something that you can settle. I don't know whether we have an alley out back of this radio station or not. But if we do, you can settle it
Father
out
has
there
a ring
after.
with peace on it.
Let's
If
get
it
it over
with that,
with.
it would be back.
We have valuable time, people time, going to waste. All right. Now let me ask Mrs. Moore a question. What